Welcome to Beyond Religion, X 2 by 2 stories of deconstruction, where we talk with people who have left the 2 by 2 church and whose beliefs have moved beyond Christianity and organized religion. Joining me today is someone who has been using her voice to shine a light on the problems within the 2 by 2 church for many, many years. Laura McConnell Conti, thank you for being here.
Hello, Mike. Nice to see you and talk to you.
So, to start off, I'd like to kind of get an idea of where your beliefs sit at the moment, and then we can kind of visit the story that has led you here.
Sure, sounds good. I consider myself an atheist, although, truth be told, I don't think too much about it. I just don't really have much interest, and I suppose that's religious trauma too. Yeah, I consider myself an atheist. I feel a connection much more to nature and much more to, space and place and people and community, and not to organized religion or organized belief.
It's funny because I was thinking about this. I've been thinking about this question a lot as I've launched into these. There was a time in my life where I think I was thinking about my belief or lack of belief a lot. And I kind of realized, I mean, granted, with all the stuff going on, 2 by 2 stuff, I it's obvious like that I, sit in a certain place of belief or unbelief, but I also don't think about it that much.
Do
It's
I? Or
just
even
like you.
talk about it, truth be told. It underpins a lot of
Right.
how you behave and how you think and what things you're interested in. But I think that people inside religion think about it far more than we do.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, I think there's this idea that atheists or agnostics or anybody who's not religious is really, eating babies for breakfast every morning, and it's like the top of their agenda. And we're just out here and enjoying life.
And kind
Yeah,
of expecting that one day we're going to die and then there's going to be nothing. We're not really
yeah.
actually overthinking it.
So then to kind of go backward to the origins of everything for you. Uh, my understanding is that you were born and raised. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, I was born and raised pretty deep in there. Not royalty kind of deep, but like deep as in like many generations deep. Both sides of my family are reasonably low socioeconomic, reasonably poor, but very devout, very, very devout on both sides of my family in different ways. My mother's family, I am fifth generation. On my father's side, I believe I'm third. I can't quite get to the bottom of that. Somewhere between third and fourth generation. My my both sets of my father's parents professed when after they got married. But I believe that my grandfather's mother may have also professed, making us fourth generation on that side. But I grew up with grandparents who had been outside and had a life outside. But in lots of ways, they were very, very devout people and very highly revered people because they had a very big family,
Hmm.
and everything about our lives was truth two by two. I didn't really know many people outside our family or our community. Came from a very big family, a very tight family on both sides, and there was, nobody else had any other belief structure or any other relationships or friendships really outside of the group. So and in lots of ways, I say I had a wonderful childhood until I was around 8, and I started to realize kind of purity culture and sexualization and how bad the abuse was in my family and community. It's probably also really around the time that I realized there was this pressure to profess, which really I never felt comfortable with. And actually, I never professed, which I sometimes forget to tell people. And lots of people don't know that I actually never professed. I had a lot of pressure on me to profess, but I could never find faith. I couldn't find it. I would pray and pray and pray, and I felt like there must be something wrong with me because I couldn't find this voice of God that everybody spoke about. There was no spirit talking to me ever, and I just couldn't find it. And I would say, well, I'd say to people, and I'd say to myself, well, when I hear this and when I understand the Bible and when I understand this thing, I will profess, but I just couldn't find it. And I'm about 45 now, and I still can't find it.
It's interesting that you had that. I mean, obviously you grew up with all the pressures of the average 2 by 2, most likely, family expectations and all that, but you had something in yourself that was like, no, I'm not going to do this until I really feel it. Because I mean, for myself, I was doing it out of obligation. I certainly wasn't. I didn't get any beam of light shining down and a big voice booming over me. And nothing like that. It was just expectation.
Yeah, 100%. And I watched all my older cousins. It was the same with the marriage stuff, and it was the same with the expectations about how you dressed and all those things. None of it ever sat comfortably with me. There's something about my personality that just was curious, and also I think practical and connected to nature and connected to place, And I just thought all of this practicality. I mean, I should also say I came from a very large rural family where the things we did were practical things, black and white. You saw, I just couldn't comprehend how they could feel this spirit, and they could, but on every other day of the week or every other thing, it was always about, well, you can't see that, so it doesn't exist. Or, it was like there was this double lives they were all leading. And I just, like, that cognitive dissonance, I just couldn't ever make it stack up for me. And that wasn't only just with belief in religion, but it was also in behavior control in other parts as well. I just could not ever. I think too curious, too much, too
Hmm.
much practicality to make it all add up, and asked far too many questions for a girl. Um, and I resisted a lot of, and they used to say things to me like, everyone used to say I was setting the wrong example for my siblings and my younger cousins because I didn't profess. And the number of times I got pulled aside and had these talking tos, or I got given silent treatment after the meeting was tested and I didn't stand up, or, I was told I was a disappointment. And I would just say, but I don't understand. Like, I don't feel what you feel. um, and, I was saying that to workers as well. I'm like, that's a lot of guts, kid. Because there weren't
Yeah,
many
for
other people
sure.
saying things like that. But I just was so like, it just didn't stack up. Didn't stack up.
Was it obvious to you that reluctance to conform was being interpreted even as a young, as a young teen or even preteen? Was it obvious that the people around you were getting a little bit pissed off by that
They
by
were
that
so
attitude?
uncomfortable with me. And I interpreted that as something being wrong with me, and I
Right.
took that into adulthood as believing that I was broken, that there was something wrong with me, that I couldn't find this thing that other people had, this joy, this belief, um, this hope, and I felt there's something wrong with me, that I can't feel it and I don't get it. And I read the same verses that you read and I don't get that. That's not what I get. What I get is a lot of questions. How did that happen? Are we sure that's the order it happened in? Rather than this, yeah, I just couldn't get from the Bible or from people's spirit the same things that other people were getting. And I felt horrible guilt and felt there was something wrong with me for so many years. Even after leaving, I felt that there must be something wrong with me because, in those early years, most of the people who left, certainly nobody spoke openly really about being atheist or leaving God. Most people who left in Australia in the late 90s, early 2000s went into evangelical churches. They left and went into other belief structures. And so I felt like, well, yeah, there's just all these layers to the fact that I just must not be quite right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That must have been very isolating.
Yeah, I guess I was lucky in that I was young and able to make new contacts in a secular world. I do feel very
Mm-hmm.
grateful that I very early established a career and a network in the secular world. Um, but it did leave me, yeah, feeling that I'm so different to my community and so different to my family, and that I don't have this thing called faith.
At what point did you use the A word to describe your belief? And was like, how did that feel when you came to that realization, if you remember it?
I reckon I've fluxed in and out of it, to be honest. I think when I first left, by the time I left, I didn't have vocabulary to describe that I didn't believe in it. I didn't have any vocabulary for probably a decade to describe the experience of not believing. I just didn't feel anything, and so I sort of stopped participating at all in this idea about God. And if I ever thought about it, I thought, I don't think it exists. It doesn't. It's not real. So for about a decade, I would never have called myself an atheist, but I was living and believing and thinking like the atheist I am now. And then I married into an Italian Catholic family, and got married in Italy. And in order to marry in the Catholic Church in Italy, you actually have to be Catholic. You have to have all the paperwork to be a Catholic. And so I went through the process of converting to Catholicism, and I didn't do that because I had some grand calling and believed in Catholicism. It was practical. And through that process, I think I learnt a lot. I learnt about concepts of grace, and I learnt about the interpretation of the Bible in a different way. And we had a very progressive family priest in the local parish, who had services for LGBTQIA plus people. And I saw a different side to organized religion, and I started to think, oh, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I do believe in God. And then I sat with that for probably 2 or 3 years, wondering, oh, maybe if I do. And then I came to a place of thinking, actually, I don't feel anything here either, other than a sense of community. And it's the same sense of community and sense of belonging and sense of place that I also got in the Truth 2x2s growing up in there. Um, and I realized, no, I think for me, it's about ritual. There's a whole lot of ritual and a whole lot of belonging. It's quite intoxicating, right? This stuff is
Yeah,
intoxicating.
absolutely.
And the Catholic Church is big on robes and big on these enormous, flower decorations, which I loved. It's
Right.
very extravagant and very in your face and very non 2x2. Right. And when I got into the flower arranging, I'd go with the women and do the flower arrangings for the back of the priest, and there's all these robes, and that stuff is intoxicating and very flamboyant and very me. But I just realized that what I'm getting from this is the same thing that was in the Truth 2x2s, not this belief in God, and not at the end of the day, I'm not going home and feeling like there's an eternal life that I'm aiming for. It's very much in the present, and I still don't believe there's anything at the end. And I don't really need it to define my morals and my ethics. And that's really the place I got to, is like, that's ultimately what lots of these people around me are using it for, is as a substitute for thinking for themselves. And
Hmm.
I don't need it. So then I went back into into accepting atheism, and I'd say that. I mean, how old's my son? He's 8. I'd say it's been a decade again. Yeah, of me just sort of feeling like, yeah, I very much identify as atheist.
At least for me, like I was an atheist from the time I left meetings, but I didn't admit it to myself even for years. That was just such a taboo word.
I know we weren't
Uh,
allowed to think about that word.
no, it was such a, I mean, a foreign concept. I don't think I'd ever even talked about atheism with anybody until I became one.
Yeah. I know, and I think
Yeah.
this conversation's so needed, and I'm so pleased you're doing this, because we're not we're not eating babies. We're just living our lives, and it doesn't. I think there is a. Well, I grew up thinking that atheists were all the people walking around with tattoos and purple hair and nose rings, and and then you become that. You realize, even if they are the ones walking around with nose rings and tattoos and purple hair, that doesn't actually tell you anything about them. It
Right.
doesn't tell you anything about their values or their ethics or their life or the ways they treat other people. And that gets completely overlooked in conversations about atheists. It's like, actually, you have to make decisions for yourself and come up with your own ethics framework, rather than referring to that of organized religion or organized group structures.
So going back a little bit, you said you didn't profess. From what I understand, you left in your late teens. Is that correct?
Yeah, and about 19.
Uh huh. And was there was that a pretty easy like transition,
No,
or
it was
were
awful.
yeah.
Absolutely awful. So traumatic. And I didn't have vocabulary to describe that for many, many years either. And I didn't have people around me to help me translate what was happening to me. I essentially got kicked out, and I couldn't identify why. I just had the wrong spirit. And then, it's pretty clear I had the wrong spirit because I wasn't professing. I was
Right.
queer. I wanted an education. I was pursuing an education. I didn't want to get married. I was pushing back on so many of the things around me. And I just got too much for them. I was too much. And so they just started reversing out of the rooms around me and just silence, just giving me silence. They would try to
Yeah.
avoid shaking hands with me at the end of the meeting. They would just stare awkwardly at me. When you went around the room and gave testimonies and I didn't speak, there was just kind of this awkward, like, staring thing that was happening. There was the not inviting me to things, the social exclusion, essentially. But
Hmm.
again, I took that as me being something wrong with me. Like, oh well, I should have just gotten married. Oh well, I shouldn't be doing this thing at university. Oh well, I internalized it all for a long time and felt shame that I couldn't just fit in. Um, yeah, and one day after a meeting, I didn't have a car, and so I had to catch public transport. And one day after a meeting, it was bucketing down with rain, and I was standing at the tram stop waiting for the tram, and they were all just sort of coming out of the Sunday morning meeting and just driving past me and, like, actively looking the other direction and pretending they couldn't see me. And I don't know, something in my head just, sorry, it makes me really sad that
Yeah.
people would do that to a kid. Just actively looking the other direction, and something in me just snapped, and I was like, I can't do this. Like, this is not God's people. If God allows people to behave like this, I don't think this is it. I don't think this is the God I want. I'm not coming back. And I never went back. But of course, at that point, I didn't know anybody outside. I didn't have any support structure outside. I had no idea that that the group even had a name. I had no anything. I was just completely cut adrift. And this was the late 90s. There was very limited like internet access. The secret sect had been circulated around my community, but had been very much kept from my generation. Like our parents and grandparents bought it and burnt it, and would never discuss any of that stuff with us. We knew nothing, nothing. Um, and so for about 6 months, I thought, well, I'm probably going to die at any point. Like, I'm just going to die because that's what we were told would happen. If
Hmm.
people leave, they die.
Yeah.
They're just going to die. And unfortunately, during that period, I actually did have a cousin who passed away, who was murdered in Thailand on holidays. And it was just the most tumultuous period. I thought, oh God, like, because we were told that, terrible things happened when people left the Truth to My Twos. And lo and behold, terrible things
Right.
were in fact happening. And I just look back at that kid and think like the absolute tenacity that takes just to be like, well, I'm going to die, but I'm still not going back there. And then, yeah, and then, I look back now and realize like I never ever believed in the underlying structure. I only stayed from fear and through the community really. And I had no choice and no money. So that's the other thing. Leaving, I was very much cut off then for everything and everyone. So yeah, it was not an easy leaving and not one I would wish on other people.
You mentioned that you were essentially excommunicated, but and it's something that I've found that the two by twos are so good at is excommunicating you without excommunicating you.
They don't use the word. They'll tell everybody. I mean, I have workers here who'll tell people, "No, we don't excommunicate anybody. Absolutely don't." And you're like, "Yeah, you don't use the word, but the practice of it is very much alive."
I feel for the teenage Laura dealing with that. It's just
Yeah, she was pretty ballsy. I'm not gonna lie.
for sure. I, it's interesting because when I left with Abby, and so I had one other person in the world, and I feel very fortunate that I had
Yeah, I mean, I
that gift.
whitewashed my story a little. I also had a partner in the Truth to By Twos that
Okay.
yeah, I felt very guilty for a lot of years because he left about the same time as me, um, and our relationship didn't survive that. Um, yeah, and I still do feel very lucky that I did have him for a number of years, because that's not a language you can share with anyone else, is it? And I think to have
No,
somebody
not at all.
else, yeah, it is nice to have somebody, I think. Yeah, and I,
Yeah.
I think I look at you and Abby and Kyle and Kari and think, oh my God, it's amazing that you guys have managed to navigate that because mine did not last.
Yeah. We at least Abby and I, we always consider it our little miracle that I mean, because the thing is, we got married when we were 21 and 19. I mean, by all odds, that should not have worked out in the end, right?
And the process of deconstruction is so hard. You are essentially a different person to what you were at the other side of it, at
Oh,
the start of it.
completely.
It is
Yeah.
so hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything else um, about like pre-adulthood that you want to talk about, or anything that you think is important to your story?
Well, for me, connection to nature was really key, I think. I'm really, really grateful that I grew up in a community that was close to nature and close to birth and death. I think for me, as an
Mm,
atheist, I look back and think, why am I not? I mean, I'm only 45. Of course, I'm not terrified of death or scared of death in the same way an older person might be. But I think I grew up around birth and death in a different way. Um, and I often talk with other atheists or even other people inside religion who are worried about what happens when you die. What is at the other side? And I often think I don't overthink that in the way that some people tend to, because I came from an environment where things were born and things die all the time.
mm-hmm.
And there was this, and obviously I do also reflect that this will change as you age and there's more illness and things in your life. But I think I'm very comfortable with the idea that there is just nothing. I'm okay with that, and I'm very conscious that that comes from growing up in an environment where I saw that every day. And that's not something that, at least not in Australia, most kids get this connection
No,
to that in a very visceral, real way.
no, it's certainly not something. I mean, I didn't grow up in like a suburban or urban environment necessarily, but I certainly wasn't exposed to um, death in nature on a regular basis the way like many rural farm kids are. Yeah.
And it's
And I
interesting. I
think
feel that it pushes you either way. Like I watch some people in my family, my father being one of them, for whom it actually makes him incredibly spiritual and incredibly like sure
right.
that there's something afterwards. But for me, it does the opposite, where I'm like, no, I'm just dead, gone.
When I see, a dead squirrel on the side of the road, I feel like, well, I mean, that'll be me someday. Hopefully not on the side of the road, but I just like every animal, I'm just gonna, you know, go back to the earth.
Have you? I guess there's a question for you. Have you, in thinking and having conversations with people, like, is that one of the main concerns for people? Like, or is it more the morals and ethics that people, yeah, think about when they think about atheism?
Um, yeah, it's I don't know that I have a sense of that yet. I think it is more the morals and ethics probably. Uh, but it also depends on where somebody is in life, right? Like I haven't talked to an 80-year-old and their answer may be a little bit different
Than a teenager
there's
with a different
than
sense
a
of,
teenager. Yeah.
yeah, that's a good point. Oh, I look forward to seeing how this evolves.
Yeah. Well, if you know any 80-year-old atheists, please send them my way. I know they're out there, but not the two by twos. Getting an
Promptly excommunicated them, haven't they?
Yeah, exactly. Going into your 20s, having I don't were you at terms with your atheism by the time you were, say, in your mid 20s?
Yeah, I felt very I felt very comfortable knowing that I wasn't interested in organized religion and that I didn't believe there was anything. I never had conversations. In fact, I have to say my entire 20s I don't think I had any deep conversation whatsoever. I spent most of the time drunk and high. I'm not going to lie. I wasn't the most functional person in my 20s. I was in and out of mental institutions. In fact, I went twice to a mental facility because I was very unwell. I just did not cope well. I was being exposed to things as well that I should never have been.
Hmm.
Traumatic things in my family, abuses in my family. I was trying to discuss those and I was being shut down. Yeah, my 20s just contained so much abuse after I left the Truth 2 by 2s for trying to talk about things that they just, yeah, people were unable to process that I was
Hmm.
speaking about these things, that I was daring to say this stuff is not okay. And it pushed me to places that I shouldn't have never had to go, made me very mentally unwell. And I knew that, and there was no word for CPTSD that, existed. There was very little counseling services. Financially, I couldn't have afforded them anyway. I was just so unwell. But I knew that I didn't believe in organized religion and I didn't believe in God and that I didn't need to. I felt like I don't have a place for it. I don't need it.
So when was it that you discovered that there was a community of some type in the for X2 by twos?
It probably took me. I look at within that first 6 months, I started investigating and started thinking, well, if I've left, I can't be the only one that's left. There has to be other people who are alive. There has to be. They can't all have just sort of died, which is what they told us, would happen. And I started just sort of Googling on the early stages of the internet because it was the late 90s. Well, it wasn't Google even. And it was very hard. Like, I didn't know that the group had a name. And words like the truth and the way and the fellowship, as you know, are very generic terms and they don't really send you to any specific site about the group. And in fact, that it often doesn't send you there at all. It needs to be a unique, searchable name for you to get results easily. And I didn't find anything. And it was expensive and not easy to get access to the internet in the late 90s as well. So
Right.
couldn't really spend hours doing it necessarily. It was sort of just a library computer lab that I could access occasionally. And then I remembered that I just started thinking about how else could I find information about the group. And I remembered, and I guess I was learning at university about primary sources of information, and I was learning about journalism, and I was learning about access to information for the first time and how to trust information because we were taught you couldn't trust things that you read, you couldn't trust sources outside of the Truth 2 by 2s, right? And I started thinking, well, like, what other sources of information might there be? And I remembered when I was growing up, there were two kids who suicided in Melbourne who were about the same age as me. And I started thinking, well, and we were told those kids died because they listened to Nirvana, that they had died because they listened to worldly music, and therefore we shouldn't listen to worldly music. And I thought, and I fell for that. I believed that. And I thought, well, if these kids died from listening to music, like maybe some journalists reported on it. Like someone somewhere must have heard that like these kids died from listening to this music.
Right.
It's just so ludicrous, just ridiculous. And so I started searching the microfiche. machines, which I'm not sure if many people will remember, but they were big machines where
Right.
they saved newspaper articles. And I didn't remember the exact date, but I knew sort of a time frame. And so I went through the newspapers on the microfiche in the university library until I found a news article, which was written by somebody who's now somebody I know reasonably well, who's a journalist called Chris Johnston. And he's written numerous articles on the Truth 2x2s here in Australia. And he reported on the Henderson kids, Narelle and Stephen's death, and he reported on the inquest. And in those news articles that I found, he interviews and asks questions of Evan Jones, who was the overseer of Victoria at the time of the Henderson kids' death, and he also Chris also in the article mentioned the name Coonyites, and he mentions that the group is a sect or a cult, and those things just blew my mind. I was like, oh my gosh, like there's a unique name that I can search, Goonieite, which I mean, obviously isn't the group we're from. It was a breakaway group, but whatever. It was a searchable term, that I could
Yeah.
find information. And then just the fact that Evan Jones had been quoted in this article, I was like, well, obviously it's us, right? Like I can't deny this is us. This is our head worker. And so then I was able to go online after that and search the word Cooneyite, which then led me to some of the early internet forums and the internet chat rooms. So that was how I first discovered that it was a cult and or a sect or a high control group, and that's how I found other survivors originally was through the obscure story about Nicole and Stephen somehow dying from listening to Nirvana.
Right. It's fascinating that they try to spin it as
Didn't
listening
just
to
try; they
Nirvana.
they they managed to actually convince
Yeah.
us of that.
Right.
I mean, they
I
told our parents to never let us near those news articles. They told our parents not to let us near the newspapers. Our parents were told by elders not to tell your children about what happened. They hid that from us. But I mean, I often laugh now because I'm like, well, all that hiding, all it did was make me find them, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's like telling your kids that they can't have something and just makes them want it that much more. It's really something that you dug up and found that on microfiche of all things. Relatively speaking, I had it quite easy being able to. I had to figure out the terms, but there was already quite a bit. There was the message boards, and Cherie's website was uh, cranking away and things like that.
Yeah, it's
So
not super easy to find stuff still, but I think more and more, and of course, in Australia, they don't think they have a name. Most of them still don't think they have a name. So,
right,
they're still going online and googling church without a name. Like often, that's a search term that comes up in my
yeah.
Instagram and my TikTok, and you're like, you don't know that you have a name, do you?
Yeah. Yeah. We've been really pointed about making sure that 2x2, the term, is in everything that we've been involved with, because it's a unique enough term that it's not going to be confused, whereas the truth or the way is going to give you all kinds of
Exactly.
nonsense.
Yeah. No, you guys putting that into things just really helped like create that unique identifier online.
Yeah.
An SEO search term, something that workers don't understand.
You had written under a pseudonym before, but what was the first thing that you used your actual name, and how did that feel, putting your name out there like that?
Yeah, so I worked under the name Ellen, which is like a weird kind of mashup of my initials for a long time. And then on YouTube, I sort of went online and searched and thought, like, where could I make the most impact fastest if I used my own name? And YouTube at the time was sort of, the one that everyone was going to. And when you searched YouTube, it came up with that funny meeting video, the mocking one that people had made on YouTube
That's right.
of like a
That's
funny meeting, like a pretend meeting. Like it was
the
very
the
funny.
classic Kunyite meeting. Look it up on YouTube. It's still there.
Is it still there? I
Oh,
haven't looked
oh
in
yeah.
years.
And the guy that made that is actually in the support group, or at least he was a year or two ago.
Stop it.
Yeah,
That's funny.
I
I'll have
think
to look it up.
I
That's
think
so
he kind
funny.
of sheepishly admitted it at one point, and then uh, kind of faded into the background. But yeah, he's out there.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, that video. Anyway, I thought, look, it got lots of views, so I was like,
Yeah,
I can do something under my own name. So I sought out a YouTuber who did things on cults and high control groups, and did the first one under my own name. It's terrifying, absolutely terrifying, and I regretted for a long time that I'd done it because the backlash was quite swift and quite
mm,
and quite fast, um, and it got a lot of traffic. So much so that he asked me to come back sometimes onto his channel because it was such um, a good conversation to have on his channel. I got threatened with defamation pretty much immediately. But I regretted for a long time that I didn't speak earlier. I should have spoken earlier under my own name. Tried to protect my family. I just really, especially the older generation of my family, my grandparents, my great aunts, on both sides of my family, were people who were well respected in the Truth 2x2s in Australia. They all had, they were all very devout people. And I didn't want to hurt them or to cause harm for them. And I knew that speaking under my own name would cause that for them. I regret that I didn't do it nonetheless, but I think I probably would have sent them to an earlier grave had I done it.
Yeah.
I don't think they would have. Yeah, I mean, that probably maybe would have caused them to be excommunicated in some way in reality. But I wish I'd done it earlier, but then at the same time, the backlash was swift and, it wasn't an easy thing to do. And perhaps doing it earlier would have been too hard for me. It's all a process, I guess. Yeah.
Said that was around 2015-ish?
It was somewhere around 2015. Yeah, all the older generation in my family passed away. I think the last one was around 2015, and I started to feel more comfortable. Like I started to feel like, what am I hiding? Like, I've got no one to protect anymore. I felt
Right.
like my parents' generation could stand on their own 2 feet. I felt like, I know enough about where you're at in life to know that if this comes out about who I am, that you'll be okay.
Yeah. Well, I know. I feel like I certainly owe you and people that were speaking out early quite a debt of gratitude, because um, it made things a little bit easier when we were leaving to have resources like that we could find, people that were actually talking about it by that point.
Yeah, it's all layered, isn't it? It's like it's a game changer every time, and I feel like imagine what it must have been like to live in the 80s or
I,
the
I
70s.
can't
Like,
even
can you
imagine.
imagine?
No. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. The secret sect, I certainly didn't hear about it because I was young enough when it was still kind of like causing waves that nobody was really telling me about it. But there was a period between, well, anytime before the 80s, right, where people just had no way of knowing how it started unless it was word of mouth. And
Yeah.
I
And
just
I'm not sure if you ever experienced this, but people say to me afterwards, "Well, like, but how did you not know that like you couldn't trace it back to Jesus? Like, surely all of you were like, oh, well, my grandmother professed or my great grandmother professed or whatever." And I feel like perhaps they did know that in the 70s because they must have been able to go, well, my grandmother professed or my mother professed. There was a
right.
real shutdown in providing us with any of that information by the 80s. By the 80s, and I reckon probably around the time of the secret sect, they stopped telling us anything about how many generations had been in and how, I just honestly didn't even know how many generations in my mother's family had been. I just
Right.
actually believed we had been born on these shores of Galilee. My family came from fucking Galilee.
Same here. I had no idea. I mean, I can even remember very specifically asking my parents, and they said the standard line that it's just always been all the way back. And you know, it's kind of like the atoms, like that men have one less rib than women. It's like it's absurd when you stop and think about it. But at the time, it just was like we were swallowing so many ludicrous things that this was just one more on the
Another
pile.
one. Yeah.
Yeah,
But then I'm like, my mother must have known, surely. My grandmother must have known, surely. I don't know. I mean, maybe they didn't. But
right.
yeah, I guess so much was hidden, wasn't it? And people
Yeah.
couldn't follow easily and find information easily. It must have just been so hard.
So in speaking out the way you've done, what kind of repercussions have there been? Have there been people that have like tried to threaten any kind of legal action, even?
Yeah, I had pretty much immediately after that first YouTube channel came out with that interview, pretty much like threats of defamation from people reasonably close to me. Actually, surprised me how scared they were. So yeah, several threats of defamation, which pretty much terrified me. Back into wanting to be quiet again. I'm glad I
Yeah.
didn't. Um, and then so they threatened defamation, and then I had to get legal advice, and then send back legal letters saying, well, it's not defamation and here's the information on why. And that wasn't cheap and it was very stressful, but in lots of ways I'm kind of grateful for that now because I know how to navigate it. It's taught me a lot. It's taught me a
Hmm.
lot about what to say, how to say it, how to keep myself safe in the process. And then the backlash wasn't even necessarily just the legal pieces. It was threats to harm, threats to my physical safety, just bizarre things like leaving notes on my windshield of my car, people
Oh
making it
wow.
known that they know what my workplace is, letters sent to my workplace, and nothing you know that police necessarily felt they could take legal action on in most of those instances, just stuff deliberately to scare me, and to try to silence me. There was one incident that was prolonged and able to be, I guess, put into more context, and I was able to take action for a intervention order for that person not to contact me again. But it's fairly swift and very uncomfortable. And from people that yeah, close, that I wouldn't have anticipated. Um, and yeah, as I said, it was scary and it was hard and it was an expensive thing to deal with, but it taught me a lot. Like
Hmm.
when I do my work now, it's using what I learned from going through that process
Right.
and understanding defamation. And defamation in Australia has some of the toughest laws to get around. Like lots of things can be considered defamation. They have fixed that definition slightly, and even just in the past few months here in Australia, you have to prove that you've actually lost income and like it's actually had an impact on your reputation. But yeah, you could, like defamation, people throw that around all the time here to
Yeah.
silence people. So it's been a learning curve. Yeah.
Yeah. Did it ever really escalate much beyond threats? Like, did anybody ever actually carry out what they were threatening to do?
It never went to court. No,
Yeah.
it's only ever gone as far as them sending illegal letters to me and to my lawyer, and then I would send it back saying, "No, this is not defamation,"
Right.
and list out why. There's only one instance where it then ended up in the intervention order, and that was me taking action against them. In fact, not the other way around, because I was like, the nonsense that you keep sending to me is actually making me feel unsafe. So, no, I mean, in actual fact, none of them have ever gone anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had a few threats from a number of people, and it's just empty threats. Like they're just people that are, I think, desperate and scared, and they're they don't want that information on the internet. But at the same time, we have the receipts to back it up. So uh, I think they would be very unwise to go further, because it would be pretty embarrassing to for us to pull out these receipts in a courtroom for sure.
Yeah, right, and costly. And I mean, I feel sorry for them. I mean, I do. I feel that they're coming from a place of wanting, of shame, because you're right. We have receipts.
Yeah,
Like you're doing it from a place of shame because you're scared. Um, and I feel great empathy for the people involved in sending them to me. I know the stories that they also have in their background, and I know, yeah, it's not easy or comfortable to see them then threatening defamation. Um, I feel empathy. I just, yeah, I think it's just sad that they choose to do it by trying to shut down the conversation instead of adding to the conversation.
if they wanted to use it for a positive outcome, like that could totally happen. But
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. On at least two of the occasions of threats that I've had, I've thought if you had actually just messaged me and said you'd love to sit down with me and talk to me about my take on the certain issue that you've taken issue with,
yeah,
I actually think you'd find that your version and my version are not too far off. It's just that the way that it's harmed us is different.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, there's so much power in them in people. They're just lashing out. They're lashing out,
yep.
and they could do it in a different way.
Something that I wanted to touch on is, uh, what does your life look like outside of this whole two by two mess? I assume you have a life other than making TikToks and doing podcasts.
Yeah, it's so important. Thank you for raising that. It gets lost a lot that that is just such a sliver of my life. The X Truth 2 by 2 world is just such a sliver of my life. And sometimes that sliver gets bigger. I'm not going to lie. Like I'm doing
Yeah,
something at the
for
moment that
sure.
does take up a lot of my life, but the vast majority of the time, it's a sliver. And yeah, it's really important that people know, I think, that we are bigger than this work, that it is just a piece of our work. I'm very, very proud of the life that I have outside of this. I don't think 19-year-old Laura could ever have fathomed that her life could be this wonderful. And there is so much joy and so much friendship and so much community and fun. I am actually a very fun, outgoing person with a big life outside of this. Um, it's hard to build community when you leave, and that's something that I want people to know, that is important, to make friendships and to make community outside of what happened to us. And that's really hard because we're not encouraged to have hobbies and we're not encouraged to have lives outside of the Truth 2 by 2. So it's it's a big piece of who I am, and I have friends that know nothing about this world and have no interest in this world, and I can go
Hmm.
days and weeks where I don't discuss this or talk to anyone else about it, um, which I think is really important and really healthy. I'm really grateful for the friendships and the community that I get from the X2 by 2 community. Now, I don't want to gloss over that because I think it's so affirming, in the support group that yourself and Abby and Carrie and Kyle run is really affirming in that regard and really safe, that didn't always exist. So I'm grateful for that. But I'm also really, really grateful just to have friendships and lives outside of this, to have a career outside of this work, which I think sustains you. You know, that stuff sustains you when it gets really hard. Because
Yeah.
I guess the other thing is that the advocacy work kind of goes along at one level and then some crisis will blow up. And I'm sure this is the same for yourself and Abby. You go along just doing your normal life and then some crisis blows it up and you do have to put down other pieces of your work for a bit because it demands that of you to do it in a way that is kind and generous and, you know, gives what it needs to that crisis or that piece of work. And then it comes back down again and you take a breath and you continue on with the things that you enjoy outside of this, your hobbies, your whatever. So yeah, I have a rich, full life outside of this. Two of my closest friends have absolutely no knowledge of the Truth 2x2s. I think I've had to explain to them what the word worker means about 8 times. Like they just have no interest, and I like it that way. I
Yeah.
actually like that.
Yeah.
It's not that they don't read the articles and that they're not proud of me, and they don't. But it's just like we have other things to talk about. We talk about motorbikes. We talk about, you know, we yeah go dirt biking. We do like things together that are not about this world. So yeah, it's. I think people can think that they know you or they know, you know, the depth of you just from your advocacy online. And yeah, I assure you, I've got much more going on.
Yeah. Yeah. As do we all. It's easy to just see people's online persona and think that that's their entirety, and that's just how it is with social media and
It
the
is,
like.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to try much harder to show the depth behind it because I did, especially I get a lot of sneaky views and sneaky watches from people I know are thinking about asking about leaving or asking a question. And I
Right.
used to put much more work into demonstrating that I had a life outside of this, you know, so that people could see that there was more depth to it. But as my profile's grown and I've had to be a bit more careful about my safety in a couple of instances,
Hmm.
sort of pulled back from that a little bit, which feels sad. I actually do feel sad about that, that I can't demonstrate more about what's behind the scenes, but just as it's just harder, I
Yeah.
guess, as your profile grows to do that. But yeah, I do have I do have a life outside of this.
Yeah. That's a really important piece to, I think, for everybody to remember. And it's not just people like us, it's everybody in the 2x2
Everybody.
community, everybody who has a social media. um, they've all got lives behind that profile picture. That's really important to remember, especially sometimes we lose sight of that when we're having conversations online. Maybe sometimes disagreements or something.
Building community can be hard too, can't it? When you're leaving the Truth 2 by 2s, like having the bravery to go and build new friendships and new connections can be really hard. So I guess that's the other thing I wanted to display to people when I used to be able to show behind the scenes is that like you can build other community, you know, like I'm part of several non-for-profits and, you know, just like demonstrating to people that you can go build other connections outside the Truth 2 by 2s and that they're safe. Yeah, how to build safe community is not something that people are necessarily taught either. So that can be important too.
Right. So tell me a little bit about what you're working on right now, in terms of advocacy and things like that.
Yeah, so I've got a very big piece of work on at the moment, which is not actually leaving me a whole lot of time for the rest of my life, but that's okay. It ebbs and flows. So yeah, in Victoria, in the state of Victoria in Australia, I'm not sure what other kind of countries' laws look like, but we have federal law and then we have state level law as well. So we have governments at two, in fact, three levels, but two main levels. And for a long time, people in Australia working in the cult advocacy space have done a lot of work into the federal level, trying to raise awareness and get funding for cult survivor services. I mean, we had a Royal Commission into institutional abuse in settings like churches and I guess lots of us worked independently for many years trying to raise awareness about cults and about abuse. I didn't really get far. And very recently, there's been a very fast, very big shift to the point where I'm a little bit overwhelmed at how fast it happened, actually. I guess that's the thing. You chug away for many years on this stuff and then
Yeah.
start to think you're never going to be able to make any kind of impact, and then bam, it changes really quickly. Um, in the state of Victoria, we have a parliamentary inquiry, so government inquiry into cults and high control fringe groups and their behaviour. And basically, that's an inquiry where people can make a submission on their experiences of these groups, and the government will do a review into those and invite people in for consultation and invite people in for interviews. And then afterwards, they will make a recommendation about whether the current laws are working and whether laws should be changed in the state of Victoria. So some laws are done at a state level, some are done at federal. A lot of our laws are domestic violence laws and our safety laws are done at a state level. So it's an opportunity for a lot of cult survivors, not just ours, but all other kinds of cults to come together, put together submissions on like what are the overarching issues that stop people from high control groups being able to get any kind of justice, and why aren't the existing laws working when it comes to cults? and that's happened very quickly. And we have only a short period of time to make submissions before they go into interviews. So we have until the 31st of July. Um, and we've got really great political support, which is really heartening, and something I've not seen before either. So that's amazing, but also quite like confronting to have politicians
Right.
actually really interested in learning about our stories and having attention at that level. So it's brought about by so one of our satellite cities, our second biggest city in Victoria, is called Geelong, and there was a church group there, church quite loosely, called the Geelong Revival Centre, which has had a lot of media coverage in the past couple of years for just terrible abuse cases, arranged marriages, people excommunicated, no jobs, terrible domestic violence and whatnot. And I think because it was concentrated in one city, they were able to mobilise the politicians around that city to get behind them and understand that this is a cult, basically. And those politicians have really, gotten behind this inquiry. And the Geelong Revival Centre have worked with a number of us. My submission was included with the Geelong Revival Centre's submission to Parliament initially to ask for this inquiry. So, at the very minimum, our name, the Truth 2x2s, is listed on this parliamentary inquiry as being crucial to it being brought about. So, nothing else happens, they're named. Um, and it's just, it's an intense process. It's a very exciting process. I guess I try not to be overly, I mean, I've been through a Royal Commission, right? I got out the other side with no outcomes really for any of us as survivors of the group. So, there's a part of me that is also muted on what we may be able to achieve. But at the very least, there is this inquiry. There will be a lot of submissions to it. Speaking to the parliamentary secretariat, who can takes in all of the confidential submissions in the last couple of weeks, they've been overwhelmed with submissions.
Oh, I
I
bet.
don't believe understood the breadth of this issue. And this is just Victoria, right? This is one state. I think
Right.
we might be the second biggest state, maybe the third biggest state in Australia. But yeah, like there is a lot of people submitting, and from lots of different cults, not just ours, and not just the Geelong Revival Centre. We have the Children of God, the Jehovah's Witnesses, lots of, the Sale City Builders. We have lots of different groups, but it's powerful. I mean, it's time consuming because obviously I've got to encourage people to submit, help people work out what to submit, because it's not necessarily a trauma dumping exercise. It's a list of things that happened, behaviours that are coercive, and a recommendation is what they would like in these documents. But it's exciting. Like I'm working for the first time really closely with survivors of lots of different groups. We've mobilised together, which feels very powerful. For the first time, we feel like we know how to get an inquiry up. So regardless of the outcome here, we move to the next state. We move to the next state. Like we know we can do this.
Yeah.
Um, it feels like a template that we're setting up, much like our conversation before, a template we're setting up that the next generation can keep building on.
Hmm.
Maybe we will get an outcome. Maybe for me, I just really want there to be more support for survivors. I really want funded domestic violence services to understand domestic violence in a cult context. I want sexual abuse in a cultic context to be better understood by agencies. I want funding for housing programs for people who are leaving and on their own. So for me, all of that funding stuff and maybe some changes to laws if that's what the committee finds. We have coercive control and domestic violence laws, which are not easy to apply to a context like the Truth 2x2s because they're not domestic relationships, they're higher level controlling relationships. So if laws needed to be changed, well, I'm hopeful that happens, but I'm not pinning that tail on that donkey necessarily. For me, this is an opportunity for all of us to really tell the stories and find ways for survivors to be supported. Join little groups of our own to be able to then take this work to the next level and the next level. So it's chewing my time, and it is a relatively re-traumatizing process, I won't lie, because it means retelling both my stories and then encouraging other people to retell their stories.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, I did this with the Royal Commission and it didn't really result in any outcomes. So I feel a lot of a heavy guilt about that. But at the same time, I know that if we don't do it, there's no chance of change. So I keep going,
Yeah.
and I see it as a layer and a platform for us to keep working on, and perhaps for other people to pick up as well when the time is right for other countries and other states. I mean, look at New Zealand. Can you believe how much they've managed to get published lately?
I know.
That
It's
feels like a
crazy.
platform that they can pick up,
Yeah. I've lost track of how many articles have come out of New Zealand in the last couple months. Those journalists they're doing the Lord's work.
aren't they? Right, and that's because there was a platform for them to pick it up and do really high quality journalism.
Yeah.
They weren't starting from a base of really low and having to learn. They could ask ChatGPT for information that was on the internet that
True.
builds up. This stuff didn't exist.
Yeah. That's something that I hadn't really thought about is that even if our work, we put it out online and it just kind of sits there and doesn't get much attention, it's feeding ChatGPT.
Mike, do not underestimate that.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Honestly, what part of this inquiry? That's what the Secretariat has been doing. Ask ChatGPT to pull stuff from the internet.
Right.
Like, it's this stuff is powerful.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
obviously, create
absolutely.
content with purpose and create good content, but content is how
Yeah.
this thing gets fed.
Yeah, and it's been interesting, even since 2023, the amount of accurate data that ChatGPT will give back when you ask it about the 2 by 2 church has gone up exponentially. But back in 2023, you could ask it and like it would give some kind of wild answers because it didn't really know exactly who was doing what and what the exact structure was. I don't know where all ChatGPT is crawling, but it's definitely getting some pretty accurate information.
Oh, that is so good to hear.
Yeah.
Oh, because obviously I'm doing this podcast of my own at the moment, and part of that was actually having a look at the Wikipedia page recently, and I was
Hmm.
like, actually, if there's a couple of things we could do to that Wikipedia page to tighten it up, so that it gives better chat GTP. Why can't I say chat GPT today? Sorry, I'm like stumbling over that word today. So it's like this stuff online is powerful,
Yeah,
really powerful.
it really is.
Yeah. So look, I don't know what will come from the inquiry, but I hope it's again another thing listed on the internet. And my story is part of the initial submission that got this inquiry up, and that will sit on that government record forever,
Yeah.
forever. Public record, people make public submissions to this inquiry will be on the public record forever if they choose for theirs to be public. Like good luck overseers denying that this stuff happened again, right? Because like there it is in writing.
I'm so glad that you've been able to participate in that and be a representative for our community. Where else can people find your work, and what else are you working on? You mentioned a podcast, and what else have you got going on?
Yeah, I've got a TikTok. I've got TikTok and Instagram are my two primary channels. I have picked up Facebook again recently. I've never really been huge on Facebook, but part of this inquiry, there's several groups online. In fact, if you're in Victoria and you would like to submit and you would like help, please look us up on Facebook because there's Victorian Cult Survivors Network, which is helping people with their submissions. So would love for any Victorians or people with a connection to Victoria as well. You don't have to still be here now to submit. So I'm using Facebook more, but predominantly Instagram and TikTok. I have a Substack, so I've written for years, but not published a lot of it. Starting to slowly publish pieces on there as well. And I'm doing the podcast, Truth 2 by 2 Cult Kids, which I initially started as sort of a 6-piece storytelling thing. I thought, there'd be 6 really cool stories I can tell from Australia and New Zealand, and then I'll sort of be done. Turns out, no, there's lots of stories to tell. So I think that will continue on for a couple of seasons and try and get some really good, high quality stories out, predominantly from Australia and New Zealand, because I really do want to encourage people here to speak up more.
Yeah.
And we've got some really cool stories here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's amazing to hear how many, like, everybody's story is so different. Even though we came from the same background, the same group, everybody has had such a unique experience in their own lives. It's really fascinating to listen to everybody's story on your podcast and in other places.
Yeah, some great storytelling happening. And I think even you telling these stories here is really important too, that people hear it from different perspectives and different ways. Because, yeah, I mean, despite the fact they told us it was the same the world over, in fact, all of us have got different experiences of it, different intersections of life and family background and, advantage and disadvantage. And I think there was a tendency for a long time to, and because information was so hard to find, to diminish us down to one kind of survivor category, the simplest, easiest one to tell. And in fact, there's so much nuance and so many different stories. It's really nice that they're being told.
That's why we're here right now. I wanted to just give another perspective for the
Yeah,
world
exactly.
to view in terms of 2 by 2s and the things that they believe, things that they don't believe, and just give a little bit of validation to people out there that maybe are like, "Ah, I don't know, I'm not feeling the vibe with all this stuff that everybody
Yeah.
around me is." And
I'm not feeling the spirit. Am I the only one who can't feel the spirit?
some of us just don't hear the spirit, and it's important that other people know that's an okay thing to have happen.
Yeah, it really is. And I think it's important that young people or people thinking about leaving know that there are people who have just decided that there isn't anything. It's okay. Or maybe there isn't, who knows? And that, yeah, the jump off point doesn't always have to be to jump out into another religious belief structure, that the jump off point can actually sometimes just to be like, I don't think there's anything. And that's okay.
Absolutely. Well, Laura, thank you very much for joining me and sharing your story and sharing so much about your journey that has brought you here and your advocacy work. So, uh, wish you the very best going forward, and I look forward to hearing more about how the inquiry goes and listening to more podcast episodes and TikToks and all of that.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for doing this show.